My name is Bob Brown, and let me tell you a little bit about who I am and who I'm not, and what we're going to do today. I'm a proud resident of the great city of Flint. I'm a father of an 11-year-old. I belong to a variety of grassroots groups in our community. One working on eliminating violence, and another one working on systemic racism. I'm also employed by Michigan State University. I'm an associate director of the Center for Community and Economic Development. Now, what I'm not is an expert on trauma. You probably all know much more about trauma than I do, but I've lived through a lot of trauma here. So what I'm hoping today to do is to have a dialogue, a conversation with you, to share with you my lived experience of the last couple years around our lead and water crisis in Flint, Michigan, and what that's done to people here. As a way of me understanding who you all are, hopefully if you would take this quick poll, and which best describes how you're located. Are you a community-based organization? Are you with a hospital, a school, educational facility, a residential facility? Are you an individual, group practice, government-based organizations, criminal justice, others? Just to give me an idea of who's all here. And as you're doing that, it'll take about 20 seconds for the poll to pop up. If you can go ahead and do that, we'll get an understanding of who we all are. So as I said, it will take a few seconds for all of this to register, and you'll be able to see it on your screen also, what the spread looks like. Okay, so it looks like we're spread quite a bit across all these different settings. A lot of us are in, if I can read this, it's very small on my screen, individual or group practice. A lot of us are with a criminal justice system, and quite a few of us are with other organizations or other types of entities. But it kind of gives us an idea of who we all are. So I'm going to just go ahead and I'll go through all the material. I'm going to pose a variety of questions to you all and try to have, as much as possible, a dialogue where I'm talking and you're typing. So we'll see how this all works, and hopefully it will be of value to all of us as we move forward. So I also want to comment that originally my colleague, Kingetta Dotson, who works for our mental health system here in Genesee County, was going to be on the webinar with me today, but she's under the weather and can't make it. And if my voice gets strange at some point, I've also been battling an illness all week long, so you'll just have to bear with me. It might be anecdotal at this point, but we all seem to be getting sicker in Flint with greater regularity. In the last couple of years, I seem to be sicker than I have for most of my life. So I can't directly attribute it to the lead issue, but it's certainly something to think about, and especially something to think about when we look at trauma. So a couple of definitions of trauma, one from the Center for Nonviolence and Social Justice, looking at experiences or situations that overwhelm people's ability to cope. another from Judith Herman talking about traumatic events are traumatic because they overwhelm our ordinary human adaptations to life. So with that kind of in mind, then the question becomes, so what is environmental trauma? And what does that look like? And how does that, is that the same, or is there little additional aspects to that? So a couple of notions on factors that are outside of ourselves in environmental trauma. What constitutes trauma is not entirely dependent on the nature of the event, but of our interpretations of the event and the responses of those who are affected, both individually and within our families and our community, and as well as the greater society. So certainly that all occurred here in Flint. Environmental trauma can trigger feelings of neglect, helplessness, loss. It can also cause stressful reactions that last longer when it's a human-caused disaster as opposed to a natural disaster. So when you think of trauma, the first question that I have for you, and would like to see some of your feedback on through chat, is in a man-made disaster like the water crisis in Flint, what do you think creates trauma? And as you respond, I will read back some of your responses. If you go ahead and enter into some of the chat boxes, what that might look like for you. So what do you think creates trauma? I'm just giving you a little bit of time to think about this. On my end, I'm not seeing anything coming up, so we might have to go through all of this. Okay. I'm seeing some of it. Sickness and fear, perhaps. No control over the situation. Lack of personal control of the situation. The absolute and total frustration with the fact that we should not have been in this situation. Fear, lack of control. Neglection from the people in charge who you feel should be protecting you. So we have some real similar themes going on. Lack of trust. So as you mistrust of governmental entities, so hold on to your thoughts around what you think, what creates trauma in man-made disasters. And as I tell you my story and as I tell you the unfolding of our disaster here, begin to think about whether or not what you've written down and what you've thought about in these few seconds, how's that match up to what transpired here and how it unfolded. Okay, so what I'm going to attempt to do is to talk for a while about 5 years of history in Flint and how we got to this place and what's occurring as a result of getting in this space. And it starts for us prior to the switch from our water from the Lake Huron water to Flint River water. It starts much earlier than that. Flint has been in the midst of disinvestment for approximately 40 years. Most of you probably know that Flint was a General Motors town, and General Motors created a great middle class here in Flint. In the mid-70s, our population was around 250,000 people, and it was climbing. By the mid-90s, late 90s, on into the 2000s, as GM left our community, our population plummeted, and we're now at about 98,000 people in our community. We went from having 80,000 General Motors jobs, which, as I said before, paved the way into the middle class for many, many people, to about 5,000 General Motors jobs left in our community. Now, with that picture in mind, also picture an infrastructure for 250,000 people, now with only 98,000 people here. Given that loss of population, loss of a tax base, given the fact that in our state, the way in which municipalities were funded, the state dollars kept on shrinking and shrinking, we went through a series of having to have financial emergency managers appointed to our city to take over unilateral control of our city governments because we were so far in debt that we couldn't sustain the infrastructure, and we could not sustain the functions of government given the loss of our population and the tax base loss that created. So in 2011, that was our second go-around of having a financial manager, an emergency manager, and the financial manager began to cut costs wherever possible. So the mandate for the emergency financial manager was not take care of the population, take care of the citizens of the community. The one mandate was to reduce all expenditures and reduce the deficit. So they were in a slash and burn mode, and in probably late 2012, 2013, a lot of our senior engineers in our water department began to retire if they could because of an overall fear that their pensions were going to be slashed and reduced. So you have that in this picture now. The financial manager has taken over control. We have a huge infrastructure, and senior people are leaving the water department who best understand the water system. In April of 2013, the emergency manager signed an agreement to stop buying water from Detroit, which is who we were buying water from, and to join the Karagandhi Water Authority, which was a new water authority that was set up to construct a new pipeline from Lake Huron across Michigan's thumb over to Flint. That was proposed as a way of saving money because we couldn't get guaranteed rates for water out of Detroit. In 2014, after we had joined the Karagandhi Water Authority, and it was going to take them 3 or 4 years to build the water pipe, Detroit stopped selling water to us. They gave us a year to reconsider, and the emergency manager said, no, we're going to continue on. So we switched to the Flint River as our source of water. Now, just to give you an idea of the Flint River, earlier than this, but not too much earlier, one day I was with some friends and we were canoeing in the Flint River, and people were yelling down at us from the banks sometimes, don't fall off, don't fall over, you know, the water's going to eat you up if you fall out of your boat. So we all knew the water was pretty contaminated coming out of the Flint water. So we were pretty skeptical about how could we change to the water that was shallower, more stirred up, and not further out into Lake Huron where sediments could deposit at the very bottom of the lake and we could get a little cleaner water. excuse me, and about a month from the switch, residents began complaining about the water, that the water was smelled, the water did not look good. In my house, I never saw that. I never saw a change in what the water looked like. I never saw a change in the smell or condition of the water. So that can be a real insidious eloper here. So let me go on. In October of 2014, I'm just doing big chunks here, GM, the one remaining plant, switched this from using Flint water to using township water, because, which is, once again, Detroit water, because their engine parts are rusting using Flint water in the facility. Yeah, so these things are happening, and officials are still saying everything's fine, everything's fine. In January of 2015, high levels of trihalomethanes are found in Flint water. The city calls for, city council, who has no power, is calling for a return to the Detroit water. But a federal judge denies an injunction to reconnect to the Detroit water. In August of 2015, now I have to tell you, at this time, August of 2015, this is when I put a water filter on my tap in my house. So now I'm hearing enough about what's going on to begin to really get worried about what's happening, even though the water in my house looks clear and it doesn't smell. So I went to get some free water filters and started doing that. So August of 2015 was about the first time that we started getting water filters on some of our filters in the city. Genesee County Circuit Judge issues an emergency injunction to reconnect to Flint water. And shortly thereafter, Dr. Mark Edwards claims that the corrosiveness, and he's a researcher from Virginia Tech, claims that the corrosiveness of the Flint water is causing lead to leach into our water. So from our lead pipes in the ground, lead is leaching out of the pipes. Now, in addition to having lead service pipes, lead could also be in your house in the solder between the joints of your pipes. It could be also in brass fixtures. So there were a whole variety of places where lead could be accumulating in your house. In September of that same year, Dr. Hanna-Attisha releases a study showing dangerous levels of lead in Flint children. So she was noticing this real high spike in blood tests in children. And that became really significant later as we learned more and more about what was happening. But the state continued to say that the water was okay. In October, the county health department finally declares a public health emergency. Now, our county health department had to, through Freedom of Information Act suits, obtain data from the city and from the state to make their determination. They were getting stonewalled by government officials also about the nature of what was going on. And finally that same month, the state finally put a plan in place to switch back to Detroit water. I'm going in depth a little bit to give you a better picture of the content around trauma. In January of 2016, the governor and the president declare states of emergency and free bottled water distributions begins. Just to let you know, last Thursday was our 1,000th day of this water emergency. 1,000 days of not having a resolution to all of this. In January of 2016, I finally decided to get the water tested in our house. And I thought, well, I'll just do this as a, kind of a secondary thing. But we've got the filter, and the water was never dirty, and it never smelled. And the standard for safeness was 15 parts per billion of lead contamination in your water. Anything over 15 parts per billion is bad news. We tested out in our house at 200 parts per billion. I've got to tell you, that was pretty devastating to be in that kind of a position. And it was insidious because, like I said before, I never thought that anything was really wrong with our water because of the way that it looked. So that's a quick look at the timeline of what's going on. Let me tell you a little bit about the effects and the issues of the water crisis and what it's done to us and our daily lives. So I'm not an expert at all about lead poisoning, but residents of Flint, we probably over time have learned more about what happens with lead poisoning. And it only takes a microscopic amount of lead in water to poison a child. And children from the age of prenatal to age 5 are at high risk for lead poisoning. The rest of us are at a pretty high risk, but not as high as those early childhood years. What can happen with lead poisoning? It can create greater risk of lower IQ scores in children, developmental delays, behavioral issues such as ADHD. So those are some of the major kind of health effects. But it also really, really affected our daily lives and our individual mental health. So think about going from a situation where you're not thinking about your lead, or thinking about your water, to now every single day you're forced to think about the lead crisis that you're experiencing because the way that you now use water. So you get up in the morning and you open the bottle of water that's sitting on your bathroom sink, pour some water in your hands to wash your face. You then brush your teeth using that same bottle of water because you can, lead poisoning occurs in water when you ingest the water, so when you drink the water. Now you try to take a shower or a bath, and you do it pretty quickly because you're not really sure, even though you've heard that lead can only poison you by ingesting it. But now it's time for your 3-year-old to take their bath. And when my son was 3 years old or 2 years old and taking a bath, he would play with the faucet, he would turn the water on, he would try to drink the water. I guess now he ingested it. So now I'm trying to bathe my child using a lukewarm bottle of water and trying to just sprinkle my child with water, lather them up, and rinse them off. Yesterday in a conversation with a variety of residents in our community and a researcher at one of our meetings on the recovery, an individual said, once a week I go to the YWCA out in the suburbs just so I can take a shower and relax under the shower, where I don't have to rush into the shower and then rush out of the shower. So those kind of issues affect you on a daily basis. On an individual mental health level, my wife and I struggled with a feeling that we had poisoned our son and that we had poisoned his friends. they all hung out at our house, and we made tons of Kool-Aid for them to drink. And this was before we had a filter. So from April of 2014 to August of 2015, over a year, I'm making Kool-Aid. I'm cooking with tap water. When you boil water, it concentrates the lead in it. We're bathing in it. We're doing a whole lot of things. So there's this overwhelming guilt and feeling that you've done damage to your own family. As a father, I also felt like I had failed in protecting my family, that I was negligent because I did not test the water sooner. And these are just exacerbated, all these different conditions on a community level. Trust is just damaged tremendously. Because this was a man-made disaster, and because the state primarily and some of our former city officials were denying that anything was wrong for the longest period of time, it was no, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine, and then suddenly it was, oh, well, never mind that, things aren't fine. So who do you trust at that point? The very people that you rely on to inform you of what's occurring, you no longer have any confidence in what they're telling you. Local businesses, especially in the restaurant industry, face some real challenges. My colleague Kenyatta's aunt had a local restaurant that went under because the people stopped going to restaurants in the city. You know, it's just too much of a risk to do that. And then there are things that you don't even think of, such as the church that I go to, we haven't done a baptism in several years because you just can't do that with bottles of water. You cannot do immersion in filling up your tank with bottles of water. It just doesn't happen. So all of these different effects and issues continue to exacerbate conditions and create more stress in our lives. So when you think about all of that, how do you think you heal from environmental trauma like the Flint Water Crisis? What do you do to create that healing? I'm just waiting, and I'll talk about some of the responses. Community help. Been a lot of that. Support from others. We've done that. The outcrying of support has been tremendous in Flint. Possibly moving away. Some people did do that. Some people left. Find a place where you feel safe. Family and community support. So what happens when you can't move? 40%, or about 47% of the people in Flint are below the poverty level. What happens when you can't move? Support groups might be a good idea. Join in an action that's productive, that makes a difference. You know, a lot of people in Flint have done that. There's been a lot of people fighting for justice. As one person just said, get involved with voting, get involved in your governmental issues. Actually, the administration did get voted out locally. That was here when the water crisis started, and we have a new mayor. So certainly, and that was the one issue that defeated the mayor, the prior mayor. Let me go on here. So what do we, in our healing, what do we currently know about health and well-being, and what are we doing in Flint to address our water crisis trauma, both in the short-term and long-term issues? one of my suggestions for you, if you want to take a deeper look at what's going on here in Flint, there's a very good website called Flint Cares. So all you got to do is type in Flint Cares, and it's flintcares.com. There is a community recovery group, which is the local folks from local agencies and neighborhood groups and local institutions that we all get together and started working on trying to fill the gaps that the state and the federal folks were not addressing in all this. And we'll all be here when they're all gone. So we created a website called Flint Cares, and we made sure that there was no one organizational affiliation in the website. We have an education group that's all the information. But one of the things that we do in the website, and what makes healing really challenging, is that there's differing views on what the issue is and what helps in the issue and what doesn't help in the issue. So you'll see in the website that we try to post alternative views when there are those views or opposing views, and say proceed with caution. You have to make your own decision what it is that you can do. Drinking from filtered water is okay to do. So the federal government and the state is saying that. Our local medical society, using the precautionary metric, is saying not so fast. You know, if you're pregnant and if you're a young child between 0 and 5, bottled water is probably the best for you. If you have a compromised immune system, bottled water is probably best for you. So that website has a lot to talk about in terms of what we're trying to do. There's been a lot of extinction of programs for children. One of the real difficult things that we're going to have to do about our health and well-being long-term is identifying those children who have been affected by lead poisoning and then tracking them for a lifetime. One of the things that happened here in Flint, there wasn't a universal poisoning that occurred. So, for example, my house tested at 200 parts per billion. House 2 doors down tested at 140 parts per billion. A house 10 doors down tested at 8 parts per billion. And we're all on the same block and all on the same street. So one house tested safe, other houses tested off the charts. So finding those folks who have been affected by lead is going to be a really important thing. In my case, I was fortunate I had the finances to replace all the piping in my house and put in 2 whole house filters, which bring us down to 0 parts per billion in our lead. But I'm not the average person in Flint. The average person in Flint is poor and doesn't have that kind of money. I live in a small house, and I spent almost $4,000 doing that, and most people cannot do that. Tracking children over time is going to be a real challenge for us to make sure that they're surrounded with everything that's needed for their well-being. We know less about adults and seniors, but we do know that prolonged exposure to lead can cause different abdominal pain. It can cause depression, distraction. You can have memory loss, increased irritability, increased nausea. There's a lot of skin rash issues going on in Flint. I know as an older adult, I'm 65 years old, my memory loss seems to be greater than what normal aging patterns would suggest. In the last year and a half, I've had increased difficulty. I can picture somebody, I know exactly who they are, I know what they do, and I can't remember their name. So I'm beginning to experience some of those things. There's lots being done in Flint around short-term and long-term. That Flint Cares website will give you some additional ideas of some of the longer-term things that are being done. A very good thing that was done for us, Medicare, the eligibility for not Medicare, but Medicaid was increased to 400% of the poverty rate. So anybody in a family of 4 that was making less than $97,000 a year would be eligible for expanded Medicare, which would help with some of the medical expenses moving forward. One thing to know about our overall health, because we all just go into the assumption that we're all poisoned by lead. The only way to really understand if you're poisoned by lead is to do a blood test. There are some bone marrow tests that are really expensive and not practical. So blood tests are the major way of understanding. But lead goes out of your blood system within 28 days. So after 28 days, the lead is now in your organs and in your bones, and there's no way of testing for it. So that's what makes tracking children and understanding our overall health much more difficult. The other thing that we know about lead poisoning, which increases trauma and stress on people, so definitely increases my trauma and stress, is that for children who have that are neuro-non-typical, so children who are ADHD, bipolar, have ODD, children who are affective schizoid, and my son is affective schizoid. He's ADHD and has a real low processing rate, and is on, in spite of that, a brilliant child. But the difficulties that he has and the behavioral problems and issues that he has, lead poisoning mimics those. So for us, it's really, really hard to understand. So is this the ADHD that's causing this, or is this lead? Or is this the combination of both, and is that why the traditional ADHD approach may not be covering it all? So it can be really disconcerting from a parenting standpoint as we try to think about all these different things. So the question for you, maybe it's a little bit of dialogue we could have. How should you help with man-made environmental trauma? What do you think would be helpful? So when you hear me talk about my stress and my trauma, what do you think will be helpful? So trust has to be reestablished, for sure. What would be most helpful for us in Flint? What would you recommend? What can we do? Tough question. Become educated on how the specifics of each man-made trauma affects people? Absolutely, I would agree with that. One of the things that's happening to me here is I'm looking at your responses is that they fade away really quickly. Ask if there are any ways to help. Absolutely. Okay, let me, yeah, maintain and improve federal and local environmental regulations. Yep. That's what kind of assistance they need and prioritize what should be available. Yeah, I agree with these. let me see here. So let me just talk real briefly, because I don't want to run out of time to maybe answer some of the questions directly. How has our community come together over this? It's really been remarkable to see the increased cohesiveness in our community. This is a horrible way of creating greater cohesion, but people have really come together. As I said, I'm part of the community recovery team, which started with about 8 or 9 people in a room from the major emergency responding agencies saying, okay, what are we going to do now? And in a very short order, there would be 300 people in a room talking about how were we going to deal with this? Where were we going to go? What were we going to do? We went through a lot of angst and a lot of arguing and a lot of yelling. People were really, really angry. But giving people that space and giving people the ability to vent and then to talk about, but we still need to do something, has been extremely helpful. In the past half year, I would say, or maybe a little bit longer, state and federal agency help has been really good. But we are continually trying to overcome the political aspects of what happened to us and the political backpedaling that has occurred from the very beginning. 6 people have been indicted, including 2 financial emergency managers of criminal wrongdoing in all of this. But it took a long time for that to happen. So it's been a real struggle to get there, and all of this, in my mind, creates more trauma and more stress because you never get to let go of it, and you never get to the point of saying, when is this going to be over with? When is everything going to be okay? There's estimates that it's going to take 3 years to replace all of our pipes from our house to the water mains, but then they're not even talking about replacing the water mains. So when do we get to a place where we actually think things are safe again, and I don't have to be stressed out? What can we do to avoid a similar tragedy like this in Flint? You can talk about this, or if you want to just start asking me general questions, I certainly want to save time for that because we've only got about 10 minutes left. So if you have a question in general for me, I'd be more than happy to answer your questions. Okay, so is there a way of showing me the questions on my chat fade so fast I barely can read them?
So one question that we received was, since the water line switched back to the Detroit water in 2015, why did it stay a persistent issue?
So why is it still an issue since we switched back?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so one of the things that happened when the corrosion occurred, so the Flint Water River was really caustic, and it destroyed all the good bacteria in the pipes that coated the inside of the pipes that prevented the lead pipes from leaching out into the water. All of that got killed. All that bacteria, good bacteria, got killed off. So when we went back to Detroit water, lead was still leaching into water, not at the same rate, but they started putting different chemicals back into the water to try to build up that phosphorus coating and the bacteria coating inside the pipes to make it safe. So that was one reason. Another reason is, like in my house, we had galvanized pipes, and those were pitted, the caustic water pitted on my pipes, and then lead settled into the microscopic pits and continued to contaminate the water. So even though the water was changed, you might still have lead within your house, that the residues were still in there. And remember, it only takes a microscopic amount of lead to cause a big damage in a child. And then when they replaced the pipes, the mere replacing of pipes, let's say in this block, shake all the pipes up pretty well, and the protective coating can fall off, and additional lead can fall into the water. So there's a lot of reasons why just switching back to Detroit water didn't instantly solve the problem.
Okay,
Other
thank you for that.
questions?
Yes, I have a list running, so I will go through them right now. So what services is the medical profession providing at the expense of local and federal government?
Well, I know that there's free blood testing that's going on. Once again, I would refer you to flintcares.com, and you can check. You can see a lot of the actual help that's going on there. And with it's the additional Medicaid expansion eligibility. So, but there's not a lot you can do to actually treat lead poisoning. I mean, medically, once it happens, it's not like a doctor can give me something to eliminate lead in my system. It just stays there forever.
Great. Next question we have is, how do you remind representatives that their priorities are with community health and wellness, not necessarily the bottom line?
Yeah, so our representatives are good about that at this point. I think overall that we just have to constantly be in a democratic dialogue with our different elected officials, to ask them to stop making decisions just based on financial gain, and to consider the human risk of what's involved. And I mean, that was the biggest thing that happened here. We put in a system, we being the state government, put in a system of governance that totally took the human equation out of every decision, and that's what happened to us. Everything was just financial. So I think it has to be that constant dialogue you have with your elected officials.
Great. Another question we have is, it seems like quality of life was/is on the line. So why stay and take the chance of harm? Aren't you angry?
Yeah, I'm angry, but I also, this is where I live. This is my town. This is my wife grew up here. She has lots of history. Why should we have to move away from our historical and our generational root living area? There's more to your overall well-being than just saying, oh, I need to move someplace else where it's healthier. If you love a place, if this is where all your history is at, you should be able to fight for where you live, and you should have the right to be able to live where you grew up and not have to move away from that place because of man-made disasters and the trauma that it causes.
Thank you. And we just have a comment that we've received saying, I'm so sorry this happened to you folks. It shouldn't have happened. I agree that everything can't be about the money. There has to be consideration for human life and well-being.
And we all appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Great. So I'm going to now take over the slides, Robert. Thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. I want to remind everybody that if you have any questions following the webinar, please contact ctac.info@nyu.edu, and we'll be sure to forward any questions to Robert. And before we end today, I just wanted to share some upcoming events offered by CTAC. We have a webinar on February 2nd, What's Food Got to Do with It? Food Insecurity and Mental Health. And then on February 17th, Shattering Wall series will kick off with the Sexual Violence, Assault, and Abuse Overview. And if you're interested in registering for any of these webinars, please visit our website, ctacny.org. And with that, I'd again like to thank Robert and everybody for attending today's webinar. Again, if you have any questions, please contact ctac.info@nyu.edu. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you could complete it and provide your feedback. And on behalf of McSilver, CTAC, MCTAC, and our presenter, thank you so much for joining today, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.